Welcome, family, to Rhonda's World, where we discuss all things fashion, beauty, current events, business, and a little advice sprinkled in every now and again. Join me every Friday when we drop videos, or we try to, and we discuss a little bit of everything on this channel. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of a, I know you want to come back. So, I don't really know why I decided to wear the Zimmerman dress today, but you know, it was a vibe and I was feeling it. So here we are. So today we're going to discuss something a little bit different. We are going to discuss affirmative action. The Supreme Court has just made a decision this past week to ban affirmative action in the admissions policies of private universities across the nation. And I can only imagine the impact that this is going to have long term. So the argument, so excuse me as I, read some of my notes, because I did take some notes. So the argument, right, is that race-conscious admissions favor Black, Hispanic, and Native Americans over other groups. And we're going to get into that, right? So the case that is in question was brought up by Asian Americans, right, who feel disenfranchised by the use of affirmative action in the admissions process of elite universities. So Asian Americans, they feel discriminated against through the use of subjective personality scores in favor of white, Black, and Hispanic students. Now, this is a little, I don't know, this part is a little bit strange for me, because if you are close with the Asian community, you know that like a lot of their focus is based around, what they do, what their grades are, and they kind of come across as not really having like big vivacious personalities, and that's because their culture is so focused and rooted on like success and working hard. So a lot of the times they tend to base their personalities around factors that include those things. So I think this is a really interesting thing, because affirmative action has historically helped Black students, African American students, Hispanics, and Native Americans, as well as white women, right? Affirmative action is a piece of legislation that first began to be put in use in 1935. And it has really helped diversify schools that have historically been really predominantly white, or like if we're taking into the account the history of America, it's excluded, right? Just straight up excluded any minority or any other class or race of people that were not white. Let's just keep it a buck, right? We're keeping it 100 here on this channel. We were excluded. We were not allowed to attend these schools, and if we were, it was in very controlled environments, right? Affirmative action was put in place in an effort to bring more racial equity into not only racial equity, racial and gender equity into the college's admissions process. Right? So there are a few states that have a ban on affirmative action that is already in place. And these states are Arizona, California, Florida, Idaho, Michigan, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, and Washington. Now, these states placed a ban on affirmative action in 2021. And right after, what they've noticed, right, based on statistics, is that already underrepresented racial groups in universities in these states declined, right? And they received an even lower representation of a diversified freshman class in these particular states, in those in the schools that are also in those states. So in California, right, at UCLA and UC Berkeley, so University of California, Los Angeles and University of California, Berkeley, they saw 21.5% of the freshman class that was Hispanic, right? And that is 29% below the population of college-age Hispanic students in the entire state. Now, that is a low percentage. It's 29% lower than the population of college-age Hispanic students that are ready to enter university. That's what that number represents. And I want to take a step back and really look at, where this notion is coming from, right? So we didn't just get to needing affirmative action in the university admissions process in order to, make admissions somewhat equal for all races so that we can all have access to a higher education, which is in fact promised to us in the Constitution, but we're not going to go there. So another statistic. So at UC Berkeley, right, Black and Hispanic student representation dropped by 50% immediately following the Affirmative Action Ban. And it lists that these students attended less selective public schools. Okay, so let's rail this in a little bit here, right? So the public school system here in America is funded by the property taxes of the area. So let's break that down. So you have a public high school, right? That's, receiving funding from the government to help run the school. That funding is based on the population of the school itself. They get a certain amount of dollars per student, but that typically isn't really enough to run the school. What the school really depends on to fund their clubs, to fund the teams, to fund AP and advanced placement courses, right, which actually help a lot of students get admitted and be competitive in the admissions process in these elite universities or just universities across the board. They don't get funded, right? So if you are an African American or a Hispanic student and you live in a lower income neighborhood, right? And we have this thing called zone school, right? So you automatically get accepted to your zone school, and then schools that are not in your zone, you have to apply and compete to get into, right? So that's kind of how it works here. But like I said, remember I said you were automatically accepted into your zone school. So a lot of students just by default end up going to their zone school outright. And because the high schools are funded by the property taxes in the area, if you are an African American, Hispanic, or Native American student and you live in an area that's low income, clearly the property taxes in your area are not going to be high. So the fact that the property taxes of the area fund the public schools really doesn't help you much, right? Because the property taxes are not high, which means that the schools are going to be largely underfunded. And that affects how many clubs the schools are able to have. That affects the AP courses that are offered in the school. And for those who are unaware, AP courses are like advanced courses, right? Advanced chemistry, advanced history, advanced mathematics, which really help students gain credits and gain a competitive edge in the admissions process. But if you come from a school that is historically underfunded, right, because you live in a poor neighborhood, you don't have access to those resources, right? So in this scenario, what affirmative action essentially does is, so when we go out into the world, right, coming from an underfunded public school, and we go out and we try to apply to get into these schools, we are finding that, okay, this applicant has AP Physics on their transcript. They took AP Physics and they got an A in it. So they're automatically, they have AP Physics and they were a part of student government and the chess club, as well as having straight A's and a great SAT score. That applicant's going to be really competitive, right? I come from underfunded public school. I don't have any AP classes because my school didn't offer them, because we couldn't, the school couldn't afford them. They couldn't afford to pay teachers to teach those courses. I also, maybe I have a sport on my resume, but I don't have any clubs, right? I don't have chess club. I don't have student government. I don't have lacrosse, right? I don't have AP history, and that's because my school didn't offer them. Like literally the high school that I went to offered AP English, and then by the time I got to junior year where I was supposed to take AP English, we didn't have money for the AP English teachers anymore. So I had to essentially retake the previous I had to retake the English classes that I already took, and then they kind of separated the class. So like half of the class was on more advanced work and the other half was doing the work that they needed to pass the Regents. But we already, the AP, we had already passed the Regents, right? But we didn't have an AP teacher because we couldn't afford one. So we ended up back in the same classes. So how fair is that to me? That even I might have straight A's, I might have a great SAT score, but I don't have AP Physics on my transcript because my school didn't offer it. So that automatically means that I'm gonna get rejected, right? Because I'm being measured using the same measuring stick as Billy and Sarah, who went to their zone school, which is in a upper middle class or wealthy neighborhood, where their schools had every club and each course that they offered had 3 AP classes, 3 AP levels of classes that were attached to it. So they had 3 AP history classes, 3 levels of AP physics, 3 levels of AP chem, and their school offered that. But my school did it. So now what affirmative action does is it levels the playing field for me coming from an underfunded school, and for Billy and Sarah that come from schools that have an overflow of funds, right? That they can use and invest in all of these courses, all of these extracurricular activities, and all of these sports, right? What people don't realize is that to do these things, it costs money. It costs money to run student clubs. It costs money to bring in more skilled teachers that can teach more advanced subjects. You gotta pay those people more, right? And it costs money to have more sports teams at the schools, like, you know, track team, lacrosse, football, basketball. Like, they need uniforms, they need equipment, and they need to travel, they need to feed the athletes. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it takes money to do all of these things, and because the public high schools are funded by the property taxes of their area, the funding just isn't there for most inner city schools to have access to the same things that wealthier kids have access to, and it could literally just be by way of where they live, literally. So what that kind of means, right? If affirmative action is now banned, that means that I have a much lower chance, or like low to nil chance of getting into a really good university than Billy and Sarah do of getting into that same selective school, right? And that is because we are now being measured by the same measuring stick, even though their school offers the entire alphabet, right? And my school only offers ABC. How fair is that? That's not fair. And that is the exact issue that affirmative action aims to fix across the board. It is supposed to try to level the playing field for racial equality as well as gender equality. Because let's not forget, women were not always allowed to get an education. We were not always allowed to vote. We only got the right to vote within the last 100 years. And I know that a century seems like a long time, but we have people who are 100 years old alive today. We have people older than 100 years old that are alive today. Our right to vote didn't exist 150 years ago. It did not. Our right to schooling did not exist 150 years ago. Okay. So, the statistics have literally shown that in California, the affirmative action ban has very effectively reduced the diversified population of UC Berkeley and of UCLA. Those schools saw historically less representation of Native American students, African American students, as well as Hispanic students. They saw less enrollment. The University of Florida in 2020, the University of Florida, which is the most selective school in the state, saw Black enrollment drop to 6%. It dropped to 6%. And that 6% is 15 percentage points lower than the state's college-age Black student population, right? 15% lower. So what that means is the college-age population is really at 21%, but the percentage of that Black population that actually get selected to, that actually get admitted to this prestigious school, University of Florida, is only 6%. And that was the Black population of the freshman class. Mind you, this is of course it's a percentage, right? So it's out of 100. So out of 100% of that freshman class, only 6% identified as Black. And that was after the affirmative action ban in 2020. And the effect, right, of all of this, the effect of banning affirmative action is that minority enrollment decreased at selective universities, while less selective universities saw an increase in Black and brown student enrollment. And what this does is it leads to lower grades, lower graduation rates, as well as lower grad school enrollment and lower income. Yeah, that's what this leads to. And I think we kind of have to maybe take it a step further and think more long term. So the idea of elite school, you have your Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Columbia, Boston College, Boston University, NYU, Vanderbilt. Elite schools are not just they're not just limited to Ivy League. We have University of Chicago, Johns Hopkins, UCLA, UC Berkeley. These are all considered elite schools, right? Like I said, they're not just limited to the Ivy League. These schools, being able, we're going to keep it 100 on this channel, right? Being able to write down and have a degree from these schools and have it on your resume really opens doors for you. It does. And for Black and brown students like us who come from underfunded public schools, we come from schools that didn't have a lot of resources, didn't have a lot to offer us, but we made the best of it. And getting the chance to go to these schools gives us a network that we wouldn't have outside of attending these schools, and it gives us access to jobs, to rooms that we wouldn't normally have access to, especially if we went to a standard kind of like mid-level university, mid or low-level university. And don't get me wrong, that's not to say that getting the chance to attend college is a blessing in of itself, right? But let's not pretend that there are not levels to this, right? Getting the chance to put Harvard on your resume, you're gonna have access to rooms that someone who went to another school just isn't going to have, right? And that's just a fact. You can say that, oh, it doesn't matter what school you go to, all you want. That's just not the reality that we live in. It's just not, right? Like, I've done both, okay? So I can tell you from experience. I went to a community college and a CUNY school, and I went to a really prestigious school. And let me tell you, the difference is night and day. It is night and day. And so one of the solutions that have been proposed by UC Berkeley and the University of Michigan, after the ban of affirmative action, they tried to use a proxy of race indicators to try and circumvent affirmative action, to try and level the playing field and diversify the freshman class a little bit, right? They use socioeconomic status and geography. But you know, it serves as a poor proxy to affirmative action because it doesn't take into account the disparity of the funding of public schools. It doesn't take into account the disparity of what this person can do, and what this person has access to isn't the same as what somebody else has access to, and that is just straight along the board. It's just a fact, right? And the major beneficiaries of affirmative action, right? Because this goes back to the undercurrent of racial injustice that continues to be prevalent within this country and within the laws. Main beneficiaries of affirmative action are white women. Because remember, women were not historically allowed to vote. We were not historically allowed to attend universities. So affirmative action also goes towards gender inequality. And this has mostly benefited white women who have they've been gaining access to these super selective schools, and that gives them inroads directly into corporate leadership. And we see an increase of white women in corporate leadership roles across the board, right? And we don't see those same effects for Black women, because if we're being honest, Black women are first seen for their color, right? And second for their gender. And that's just how society views us. And that is part of the reason why we have not been able to attain those same results. But Black women are the most educated minority in this country. We hold the most degrees of what is considered a minority racial class in this country. And we're proud. We're proud. And it's like, affirmative action has really been a law that has leveled the playing field for so many African American students, Hispanic students, Native Americans, as well as white women. It has leveled the playing field for us all, or as much as it possibly can, because let's not, negate the fact that even though we did have affirmative action, there were still disparities and there were still problems, okay? So it's like taking this away effectively X's us out of the equation. And 10, 20 years down the line, it reduces the access that we have to rooms where world-changing decisions are being made, right? Justice Ketanji Brown is only at that Supreme Court seat because she went to Harvard. So is Clarence Thomas. He is only in that seat because he went to Harvard. All of the Supreme Court justices attended Ivy League school. Every single president that we have ever had went to an Ivy League school or something that was considered an elite university. You can see it in the news anchors that we have on our most popular news channels. NBC, Fox News, CNN. Those anchors come from prestigious schools. It doesn't necessarily have to be Ivy League, but it's a Georgetown, it's a Vanderbilt, it's an NYU, it's a Boston University. And we have to do a better job of understanding the racial undercurrent of this country and doing better by our people and creating more equity. Thank you guys so much. I hope you come back to Rhonda's world, and you know when you leave, you gotta come back. You gotta come back. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Drop a like, subscribe, comment. Tell me what you think, because I'm fired up about this and it's really disappointing to me. It really is, because it sets us back decades. But I love you guys. Drop a like, drop a comment, tell me what you think, and I'll see you soon. Mwah.